What's going on, Slop Nation? Welcome back to another bit of Man Reads News. Breaking news from North Shropshire as police see single-use vapes in vape crackdown. Local residents ask for their opinion, and Timmy13 says, I'm not too sure what the huffing and puffing is about. I'm sorry, is that a microphone and a camera that you are hiding in your glasses? Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program of Man Reads Paradox Slop. Now, usually I wouldn't do a back-to-back dev blog reading on this channel for the simple fact, even for me, that is quite a bit of slop. But this is our first look at a rework Japan in HOI4, which is something that obviously we all knew was coming and we've all been asking for the longest time. So let's get into it. Now, there was also a dev diary before this that I'll probably fill in at the end here. It's not too much to talk about. It's about one of the other nations that will be getting a focus tree in the newest DLC. I don't think it's got a name publicly yet. I haven't even been told behind the scenes if, it does have a name. If they have, maybe I've just forgotten. So first things first, keep in mind that all of this is still a work in progress and things will change, but this is also the time to provide feedback and suggestions so that they might end up in the game. All right, crazy suggestion. Give this man 50 pounds on his face right now. That's right, I want the Hirohito Eats Cake minigame. The more you give him, the rounder the face gets. We know the balance of power mechanic, or the BOP, as it's now commonly known around these. You've never called the balance of power the BOP? Well, the BOP is more or less seems to be tailor-made for Japan, and it's inter-service rivalry between the Army and the Navy. So if you don't know too much about, obviously, this period of Japanese history, well, let me tell you a thing or two about the East. So very famously, Japan in this period, very much a tug of war between different factions in how exactly they want, obviously, the war effort to go and how the war effort actually went, constantly tugging for more control. And like they said right there, the BOP does seem like the perfect system for Japan. Obviously, you have all these different factions competing with each other. I really hope that they make this fun. There's already a very basic version of this in the game already with your decisions as Japan. It's not too, in-depth or anything like that. You can pick between a few different buffs. Specifically, if you want to get like a few factories early on, you can side with the Army, or you can do the Navy, get yourself more, I think, dockyard output. I'm not too sure if they give you more naval dockyards. They probably do. I just never do it. Oh, I hate the fact I'm going to have to just keep calling this the BOP. But the Imperial influence doubles as both the BOP between the Army and the Navy, while also allowing the Zaibatsu, large industrial conglomerates, and the civilian government to enter the fray and fight for the chance to influence the Emperor. Each faction will have unique advantages and disadvantages, and they will rise and fall depending on focuses you take or demands you either succeed in fulfilling or not. So also, I do think this obviously is more historically accurate to Japan in the time period. I am kind of worried about the fun aspect of this and hoping that it's not just something tedious. And when I say tedious, I mean Switzerland-like. Whilst Switzerland in HOI4 obviously was a very experimental focus tree and how it works with their balance of power as well, I do really hope that they've kind of learned a lesson from Switzerland and the fact nobody wants to play it. This shouldn't be a big hindrance to your fun in the game. And what I mean by all of this is that I really hope that, obviously it already kind of says right there that as your game progresses, more different factions will be more powerful than the other, and that does make sense, obviously, because, at the start, the Army faction should be incredibly powerful because they straight up started a war in China. I just really hope that this becomes a bit more of a gameplay addition than just a gameplay hindrance. I think that's the best way to put this. You don't want to have to worry about playing Japan, because then if you think, I have to play Japan, that'd be so fun, then you're like, but I also have to spend 40 minutes of my life micromanaging the various factions. That doesn't sound too fun. But if instead you were like, okay, I'm going to play Japan today, but I'm going to do a Army faction and maybe the Army and the Zaibatsu faction. I'm going to combine those two today and have a Army Zaibatsu game. Each game could be technically different based on what you want to go into and who you want to be more powerful. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't want every game to just be a constant, endless, annoying power struggle between the four, which I know is just a whole different, like, that is not the point of this in the slightest, because obviously throughout the entire period of the game and the history of Japan, these guys were all fighting each other, but I do want it to just not be too demanding and too much of a headache to deal with. Also, love the fact this is just casually off-center. Maybe I'm just rambling away, but I hope someone kind of understands what I'm coming from here. I don't want this just to be, you know, a hindrance to the gameplay. I do want it to be an addition, and you look forward to using this and, you know, prioritizing one faction and then, you know, surely prioritizing a little bit of the Navy, but maybe sidelining them for one game and still having a pretty fun game. So one thing that's caught my interest here is obviously the faction balances, and the BOP, as it is now famously known, will actually have missions for you. I'm assuming each faction to get a little bit more influence, and we can actually see the prerequisites to what this mission would be. So the civic faction demands trade law change, and they want to have you either export or free trade focus, and we can look down here and see what that would end up being. Obviously, the civic faction loses a small amount of influence, replace meddling civic faction with subdued civic faction. So you can essentially have your faction, just get them to shut the hell up by giving them whatever they want for a bit. And depending on what their current influence even is, maybe the modifiers that they have, if they have gone down to subdued civic faction, you know, it's not as bad. You get a little bit of war support, bit of recruitable population, trade law costs, because obviously, you know, you could just immediately go back to your trade law and just say, screw you to the civic faction. But that seems okay. Again, it is 360, so you have a whole year to either accept this or not, which is good. I guess that's a good amount of time if you, I'm assuming, get a lot of these pop up. I don't know if you can get multiple at once. Again, there's a lot of assumptions in this. I'm just reading through this the first time. We also have one from the Army Weapons Administration HQ that asks you to requires you instill the spirit of Bushido at war with a major country, and army faction is at least influential, and that will give you a breakthrough in land warfare. That's pretty good. Although, actually, considering what Japan was doing in their scientific researches at that time period, kind of horrifying to think about. What did you mean you figured out a bit of... you got a breakthrough? How did you get a breakthrough? We'll keep going down here. So some focus will require a specific faction of a certain level of influence for you to be able to complete it, while other focuses will get better outcomes depending on a faction standing. All in all, there are 4 levels of influence: subdued, meddling, influential, and dominating. So you can see a bunch of the factions here, all at different levels. Well, actually, no, these are all at dominating. So I'm assuming this is the best version of that faction if they are the most powerful. So like I said, if you were going for an army game or something like that, or, you know, an army Zaibatsu game, these are the bonuses you'd get for being the top of the top. And I'm not sure if having, obviously, a dominating army faction will also have a subdued other factions around them, and if so, then we can actually look at what that would be. So they've gone down to subdued right there, and there obviously are negatives to having them be subdued. So I do think it's going to require quite a bit of micromanagement. Either way, I'm a little skeptical, obviously. I'm not too sure until I obviously get my hands on it, which is going to be a few months away, given that we're only just seeing the Japan rework here. It's only part of it, so we're probably a few months away at least, I imagine, until this DLC comes out. One thing I know a lot of people have complained about for the most part here, moving down, is the fact Japan doesn't really have any historical show for who was actually in charge of the country during the period that HOI4 takes place. If you're just playing normal HOI4, you're always just going to have Hirohito, which is definitely not the case for Japan, especially before Tojo actually got in control. So you can actually see, starting off, you do start with a coup d'etat happening. It is the Kadoa faction. I'm not too sure if I'm saying that correct, but it's what you usually do in your focus tree when you start off. But the political starts with the Kadoa faction. Kadoa preparing for their attempted coup d'etat in order to replace the decadent government and return to Japanese tradition. Before they can do this, however, one of their leaders needs to be let out of house arrest while the trial is happening, giving you a small buffer to prepare. So yeah, bit of a tumultuous time to be a Japanese politician for the most part. I do believe there was a lot of prime ministers that were constantly flip-flopping around this time. Again, not that great on my Japanese history, even though I did push my glasses on and say, let me tell you about the East. Have you ever heard of Naruto? Interesting though, you do start off as Japan now as non-aligned with Prime Minister Kaisuke Okada at the helm, Japan will now instead become the fascist ideology when completing the Imperial Rule Assistance Association. What a mouthful! Why couldn't we just get like a fun little acronym like BOP? But obviously democratic instability and politicians, not too, not too interesting, I guess, but that does give us a tiny little look there of the Japanese tree. It's blurred, but we're getting a little taste of what we got to see there. Now, this is pretty interesting. Another change for Japan is that now instead of always having full control of when or even if to go into China, they, depending on the branch they're going to go down, might have to start a war whether they like it or not, as the Kwantung Army is always seeking new opportunities to expand their zone of control. So I'm assuming this means your army could just be like, you know what, we're going into Japan, which may or may not have a historical precedent. So the army having some degree of control of their own, goals is kind of interesting. Let's have a look here. So this is the Kwantung Army growing impatient, so this will start the war with China if you don't do it in time. So let's look at what would stop this happening if you obviously don't want the army to start a war with China, or you don't want to fight China at all as Japan. But if your original country is not Japan, that makes sense. Is in a civil war, kind of makes sense. Is a subject of another country, yeah, okay. Is at war with China already. I mean, I still think the army might try and start War 2 coming out this this fall, War 2, and has completed focus subdue the Kwantung Army. I'm going to go out of my way and say that's probably an alt history path. Not sure though. We have not had any look at the Japanese focus tree bar this thing right here. So potentially, depending on the factions you go with, you could get a better control in a historical Japan game of your faction being the army in this regard, but that's a lot of speculation. The Navy has a similar decision as well as the army, where they can also demand that you strike south, so going into Indonesia, British Malaya, Dutch East, all the stuff down here that it says, which is what's already in the game already, but this one, it doesn't look like it actually declares on them on their own volition. The Navy will just be very, very upsetty spaghetti if you say no. And then, okay, hold on a second. Okay, we need to get this, hold on, let me zoom in. Okay, this is really hard for us to see anything, but this is just showing off the Hokushin Ron, which is just a army focus, it looks like. But I'm trying to get, a cheeky little sneak peek of what these paths might be, but we do have two right here. I'm assuming this is either the historical route or the Kodowa faction route, which, as far as I can see, they do have some shared bits in the middle here, but there's not too much we can really get a look at just from this. All I can say is that I think, is that the historical route right there? I think that might be the historical route, because that is the spiritual mobilization, but they could have just reused it, so let's not. Maybe I'm just wrong. But yeah, I don't think there's too much for us to discern from this. And don't worry, if you're looking at this right now and thinking, damn, I might need to get checked for cataracts. No, it just, that's how it looks. So sadly, no sneak peek for the most part. I mean, if we really wanted to, we could really zoom in here and try and figure out, but I don't think there's too much fun in that. I guess the only thing that catches my interest down here is what these branching paths might be. The only thing I can really think of is leaders, because as you can see, it's like an outline of a person. I guess it's who you really want to be in control at the end of your faction. I'm not entirely sure. It's really all just speculation, because again, get your eyes checked for cataracts. But that is the Japan dev diary for today. There is one more thing I want to look at, and it's going to be just not so much what's in the last little dev diary here, which is the one where they actually announced there will be a Filipino tree. So yes, they have gone ahead and already announced that there will be a Filipino tree. It doesn't look too in-depth from what I've seen. I have read through this already. It looks pretty small in terms of content, which I wasn't expecting much from a Filipino tree, I'll be real. I'm assuming if you're a Filipino Timmy, you probably like the largest tree in the world for the Philippines. Let's be realistic here. There's not too much for you to show. I mean, we can just look at the focus path right here, and you know, I'm not excited for it. I'll put it that way. It is a small little tree, and I kind of think they put it out there just obviously to be a teaser to show that, you know, there will be other nations that are getting focus trees. But it definitely asks the question of who else might get a focus tree if we consider that this will be one of trees that get added. And the goddamn rung gave us obviously the German focus tree, so we can assume obviously the Japanese focus tree, the Austrian focus tree, the Hungarian focus tree, the Belgian focus tree, and the Congo focus tree. I think it's probably going to be more in line with this Congo focus tree in terms of content. And I don't think this is the best, you know, how to gauge what might be in the new DLC. But looking at it, we already know we're going to get a China rework and a communist China rework. So we can kind of already knock 2 of those off already. Well, 3 technically. And then we're also getting the Philippines, which leaves room, I think, for 1, potentially 2 more nations. So with my speculative mind right now and my big old assumptions, I think it might obviously be Siam that also gets a focus tree. Potentially though, it could also not be Siam, and we just instead get all of the, you know, warlord trees, Manchuria as well. On top of that, they all get new trees, and I think if that's the case, then we probably won't get another nation with a tree, and we could be really grasping and say the US also gets a small little rework. I do think a few of their focuses may need a bit of, you know, a rejiggle round potentially with this DLC. I do think they could sneak a couple in for the US. I'm just not 100% certain about that. I do think if they're going to do something, they're really just going to focus on China, Japan, warlords, Manchuria, and then obviously we got the small one of the Philippines. But I could be completely wrong here, and that Siam also gets, you know, a little bit in there. But I think if we're realistic, it's going to be Manchuria and the warlords. I don't know. Maybe Siam will get a little bit of a tree, but I'm just not expecting too much, if anything at all. On terms probably, you know, with like the Hungarian focus tree that was just a rework of the original tree. I think Siam could be in line with that, or just the Philippines again, because there is a lot of stuff that really needs attention in this DLC, and I wouldn't want Paradox, you know, kind of splitting the dev time here between, you know, all these little nations, when I'd prefer they just make a really good China DLC with all the warlords getting an updated warlord tree, obviously communist China as well getting a separate tree, and on top of that also getting Manchuria a focus tree as well. So I wouldn't get your hopes up too much about more nations getting announced for focus trees. If they are, Manchuria or Siam is my bet. I can't see anyone else getting anything particularly in this sphere. Maybe the US will get a couple extra focuses, but not a full rework. But that's just my little bit of a guess. I don't know for certain. The Paradox could just surprise us, and, you know, we get, you know, a Siam rework, the Philippines, Manchuria, maybe even like Indonesia or British Malaya get a little bit of stuff too. But I'm gonna just say, don't get your hopes up. You know, let's just go look at the price of this DLC. But yeah, that is the dev diaries for today. Who do you think is also gonna get a potential rework of their focus trees, or get a brand new one in general? Could we actually see a Siam tree? I'm not too sure. And let me know if you enjoy these little read-throughs of the dev diaries, and if you do, can you not read? Why do you want me to read it to you? I'm just kidding. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and Slop Nation out.